Rachel Adams adjusted her rearview mirror for the third time in 10 minutes, a habit that 3 years of civilian life hadn't managed to break. The dusty Honda Civic hummed along Route 89 toward Phoenix, each mile taking her further from the quiet existence she'd built in Flagstaff. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail that emphasized the sharp angles of her face, weathered by sun and secrets she'd never share. She wore faded jeans and a plain white t-shirt, deliberately unremarkable, though a trained eye might notice how the fabric draped over lean muscle. No jewelry adorned her fingers or wrists, but dog tags rested against her chest beneath the cotton, their weight a constant reminder of who she used to be. At the last gas station, she'd positioned her car for a quick exit without thinking about it. In the roadside diner where she'd grabbed coffee, she'd automatically chosen the seat facing the door with clear sight lines to both exits. The other patrons saw just another woman traveling alone, maybe heading to visit family or starting a new job somewhere. They didn't notice how she cataloged every person who entered, how her hand never strayed far from her keys, or how she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years of training. In Flagstaff, she was Rachel the librarian, the quiet woman who helped veterans navigate VA paperwork and always had time to listen to their stories. Her neighbors knew her as someone who kept to herself but would shovel their driveways after snowstorms without being asked. The elderly veteran who lived 2 houses down suspected there was more to her story, something in the way she moved, the way she watched, but he respected her privacy as she respected his. None of them knew about the nightmares that still woke her at 3 in the morning, reaching for an M4 rifle that wasn't there. They didn't see her map exit strategies in grocery stores or calculate fields of fire in parking lots. 3 years of invisible, 3 years of normal. Rachel the librarian didn't have scars from Helmand Province, didn't wake up tasting dust and blood, didn't see threats and shadows. She kept the mask on, living a carefully constructed life that honored the fallen while protecting the living. But beneath that facade lived Lieutenant Rachel Adams, call sign Ghost, the woman who'd made history in ways that would never appear in textbooks. 2019 felt like another lifetime when she'd led SEAL Team 4 through the treacherous valleys of Helmand Province, earning her call sign through an uncanny ability to infiltrate anywhere unseen. She'd been the only woman to complete BUDS Hell Week in her class, not because of special accommodations, but in spite of every attempt to wash her out. The instructors had pushed her harder, held her to impossible standards, waiting for her to ring that bell and confirm their biases. Instead, she'd emerged from the surf torture and sand runs with steel in her spine and determination that made even seasoned SEALs take notice. This trip to Phoenix wasn't for pleasure. It was another quiet mission to deliver cash to a veteran's family facing eviction, money that would appear as an administrative error correction in their favor. She could have mailed it, but old habits died hard, and she needed to see with her own eyes that help reach those who needed it. The Honda Civic was deliberately forgettable, Arizona plates properly registered, nothing to draw attention at checkpoints that had become increasingly aggressive in their searches. But as she approached checkpoint 19, Rachel's tactical mind began spinning up despite her efforts to remain in librarian mode. The checkpoint had earned a reputation among locals as a place where constitutional rights went to die. She'd heard the stories from veterans who'd passed through unnecessary searches, deliberate humiliation, officers who seemed to enjoy their power a little too much. As she pulled up to the checkpoint, Rachel noticed the officer approaching her vehicle. Officer Derek Hawkins, according to his name tag, was about 28 years old, with the swagger of a high school quarterback who'd never quite made it further. His eyes lit up with a predatory gleam when he saw her Arizona plates and noticed she was alone. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he ordered, though Rachel had already provided her license and registration without issue. She complied with calm precision, movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. What started as standard procedure quickly turned hostile when she failed to show the fear or deference he expected. Her calmness seemed to infuriate him, as if she should be intimidated, should be apologizing for whatever imagined slight his ego had conjured. "You think you're better than me?" Hawkins demanded when Rachel responded to his questions with quiet courtesy instead of nervous babbling. Rachel's eyes remained steady, her voice calm. "I'm just trying to get to Phoenix, officer. Is there a problem with my documents?" The question was reasonable, polite even, but it only seemed to anger him more. Rachel felt a familiar chill run down her spine, the same feeling she'd had in hostile territory when a situation was about to turn dangerous. Officer Hawkins began searching Rachel's car with unnecessary roughness, tossing her belongings carelessly while she stood watching, her hands clasped behind her back in a position that looked respectful but was actually a combat-ready stance. Her tactical mind cataloged everything. 3 officers present, 17 civilians in visual range, 4 phones actively recording, 2 security cameras on the checkpoint building. The crowd was growing larger by the second, drawn by the spectacle of a woman being subjected to what appeared to be an increasingly aggressive search. Some shook their heads in disgust at the officer's behavior, others simply recorded, and a few called out protests that Hawkins ignored completely. "You got something to hide, sweetheart?" Hawkins asked, his voice dripping with contempt as he continued his search. Rachel watched him rifle through her personal belongings, her wallet, chapstick, the veteran assistance pamphlets she carried. Everywhere. When he found the pamphlets, he held them up like contraband. "Playing soldier supporter?" he sneered. "Let me guess, you've got a thing for broken heroes." The disrespect in his voice when he said, "broken heroes," made Rachel's jaw clench the first crack in her calm facade. She thought of the veterans she helped at the library, the ones who'd given everything for their country, only to come home to indifference or outright hostility. Officer Martinez, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably. Rachel read him as former military, probably discharged dishonorably and compensating with his badge. Officer Thompson wouldn't meet her eyes, following Hawkins's lead, but clearly unhappy about it. "I need to speak with your supervisor," Rachel said when Hawkins demanded she explain why she was hoarding veteran information. "I'm the supervisor here," Hawkins shouted, spittle flying from his lips. The crowd murmured uneasily at his aggression. But then his hands found something that made him stop a locked metal box secured under the passenger seat. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, with a combination lock that had seen better days. "That's private property," Rachel stated quietly, her voice carrying the same tone she might use to note that the sky was blue. Hawkins's face flushed red at what he perceived as defiance. "Nothing's private at my checkpoint, sweetheart." "You got something to hide?" His hand hovered near his weapon, an unnecessary escalation that made Rachel's tactical mind spin up despite her efforts to remain in librarian mode. She calculated angles and distances automatically. She could disarm him in 2 moves, but that wasn't who she was supposed to be anymore. Rachel, the librarian, didn't think about strike zones and pressure points. She didn't notice that Thompson's stance suggested military background or read Martinez's discomfort as potential leverage. She was supposed to be nobody special. But these men dishonored the uniform they wore. And how many others had they done this to? How many veterans had stood here, been humiliated by those who were supposed to serve and protect? When Hawkins forcibly took her keys to open the box, Rachel made a decision that would change everything. She didn't resist, didn't protest further. She simply stood there, memorizing badge numbers and faces with the same precision she'd once used to memorize guard rotations in hostile territory. The box opened with a soft click, revealing military challenge coins carefully wrapped in cloth, a folded flag in a triangle case, and documents marked with classification stamps that should have made any law enforcement officer pause. Instead, Hawkins's face twisted with contempt. What kind of stolen valor garbage is this? He picked up one of the challenge coins, examining it like it was counterfeit currency. You know what we do with people who pretend to be heroes? The elderly veteran in the crowd, wearing a Vietnam cap, stepped closer, his eyes widening as he recognized the items scattered in the box. His lips moved silently, and Rachel caught the single word, ghost. She didn't respond, couldn't acknowledge it, but something in her eyes must have confirmed his suspicion, because he took a sharp breath and stepped back like he'd seen a phantom. The zip ties came out before Rachel could respond to Hawkins's accusation. He wrenched her arms behind her back with unnecessary force, the plastic cutting into her wrists as he tightened them with sadistic precision. "On your knees until we sort this out," he commanded, pressing down on her shoulder to force compliance. Rachel dropped to her knees on the scorching asphalt with controlled precision, her face betraying nothing even as the heat seared through her jeans. The metal bit into her wrists, but it was nothing compared to the burn of humiliation as strangers raised their phones to record her degradation. "Another privileged white woman thinking rules don't apply to her," Hawkins announced. To the gathering crowd, his voice dripping with satisfaction as he appended her purse onto the ground. Lipstick rolled across the pavement, papers scattered in the desert wind, and among the debris, something metallic caught the harsh afternoon sun. A weathered Navy SEAL Trident badge tumbled free, its silver surface reflecting the light like a beacon. The crowd's murmur died instantly. Even the desert winds seemed to pause as recognition dawned on the nearest onlookers. Rachel's breathing remained perfectly controlled despite the humiliation. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, the same rhythm that had kept her alive in Kandahar. She didn't need to look at the badge to know every scratch on its surface, every dent that told a story of sacrifice. Inside her mind, she began counting each second of this indignity, cataloging every detail for what would come next. Stay calm, count breaths. This wasn't Helmand Province. She wasn't compromised. Let him dig his own grave. The asphalt burned like a branding iron through her jeans, but Rachel had endured worse, much worse. Her tactical assessment ran automatically. 3 officers present, 17 civilians in visual range, 4 phones actively recording, 2 security cameras on the checkpoint building. Officer Hawkins stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, favored his right leg from an old injury, and holstered his weapon on his right hip with the retention strap loose. Sloppy. His partners, Martinez and Thompson, hovered uncertainly behind him, their body language screaming discomfort with the escalation. Some in the crowd began to drift away, uncomfortable with witnessing such obvious abuse of power, but unwilling to intervene. Others stayed, phone steady, understanding they were documenting something that needed to be seen. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, watched from behind his mother's legs. He wore a small pin on his jacket that read, "My daddy serves." His eyes were wide with confusion and fear, watching a woman who looked like his teacher being treated like a criminal. In that moment, Rachel made a decision not for herself, but for that boy and every child who needed to believe that service meant something. Her spine straightened imperceptibly, and for the first time since this began, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. The elderly veteran had moved closer, close enough that she could see the Purple Heart pin on his weathered jacket. His face showed the recognition of someone who understood sacrifice, who knew what those scattered challenge coins represented. "You know what?" Hawkins said, his voice taking on a false note of mercy. "Maybe I'm being too hard on you." The words sounded conciliatory, but Rachel recognized the tone, the false kindness of a bully who wanted his victim to feel grateful before he struck again. The crowd relaxed slightly, some lowering their phones. thinking the situation was diffusing. Even Martinez looked relieved, his shoulders dropping from their tense position. But Rachel knew better. She'd seen this tactic before in interrogation scenarios, the momentary reprieve that preceded the real cruelty. But first, Hawkins continued, pulling out his phone with theatrical importance. Let's verify these documents aren't forgeries. Can't be too careful with all the stolen valor cases these days. He dialed Border Patrol's database division, his voice carrying across the checkpoint. Yeah, I need you to run a check on military records. Rachel Adams. The weight stretched like a blade being slowly drawn from its sheath. Rachel's mind processed the delay, understanding what was happening in some database far away. Her records weren't just classified, they were compartmentalized, requiring special access that a Border Patrol query wouldn't immediately grant. She calculated the timeline. 15 minutes for the initial flag, another 10 for escalation. 5 more for someone at the Pentagon to realize what was happening and who they were dealing with. The desert sun continued its assault, but Rachel had been running from Ghost for 3 years. Maybe Ghost was never meant to die. Maybe she was just waiting for the right moment to rise. Hawkins's phone buzzed with an incoming call, and Rachel watched his face shift from smug satisfaction to confusion as he listened to the voice on the other end. The desert heat shimmered around them, creating an almost surreal atmosphere as the moment stretched into uncomfortable silence. That can't be right, Hawkins said into the phone, his voice losing its commanding tone. Check again. Rachel remained perfectly still on the burning asphalt, her breathing controlled, her mind working through the implications. Right now, someone was looking at a screen full of redactions and warning flags, probably calling their supervisor, who was calling their supervisor, creating a chain reaction that would eventually reach someone with the clearance to understand what they were looking at. The crowd grew restless, some arguing among themselves about whether to intervene, others insisting on continuing to record. Parents pulled their children away from the scene, unwilling to let them witness whatever came next. What do you mean classified? Hawkins demanded, his voice cracking slightly. What do you mean call the Pentagon? The word Pentagon rippled through the crowd like an electric shock. Martinez and Thompson exchanged worried glances, their earlier amusement evaporating like water in the desert heat. Even they understood that Pentagon involvement meant this was far beyond a routine checkpoint stop. Thompson shifted his weight. Repeatedly, his military background making him more aware than his colleagues of what classified military records might mean. His discomfort was now obvious to anyone watching, and Rachel filed away his reaction for future reference. The elderly veteran had moved even closer, tears forming in his eyes as he stared at the scattered military items on the ground. He picked up the presidential unit citation with reverent hands, studying it like a precious artifact. She's real, he whispered to no one in particular. She's the one from the stories. Rachel's phone, lying among her scattered belongings, began buzzing with incoming calls. Multiple lines lighting up simultaneously, the screen showing numbers with Washington area codes. Even from her position on the ground, she could see the official designations. DOD, Pentagon, Naval Special Warfare Command. Chief Walsh arrived on scene just as the calls began reaching a crescendo. His tablet glowed with information that made his face go pale as he read. He approached Hawkins with the careful steps of a man walking through a minefield. Derek, he said quietly, his voice carrying a tone Rachel had heard before, the careful control of someone trying to prevent a career-ending disaster. I need you to step back from this situation, now. But Hawkins was beyond listening to reason. His world was crumbling around him, and like all bullies faced with real consequences, he doubled down on his aggression. I don't care who she thinks she is, he snarled, gesturing at Rachel with contempt. She's a fraud, just like all the rest of them. Probably bought this stuff on eBay. That's when the first military vehicle arrived, followed quickly by two more, not border patrol vehicles, but actual military police in full tactical gear. The crowd parted as armed soldiers took positions around the checkpoint, their presence making it clear that this was no longer a routine stop. A Navy commander stepped out of the lead vehicle, his uniform crisp despite the desert heat. He surveyed the scene with the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. His eyes found Rachel, still kneeling on the asphalt, and his jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "Which one of you is Officer Hawkins?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never had to raise it to be obeyed. Hawkins raised his hand weakly, suddenly looking very small in the presence of actual military authority. The commander's eyes swept over the scattered military items, the woman in zip ties, the crowd of filming civilians, and his expression grew darker with each detail. "Officer Hawkins," he said, his voice carrying across the checkpoint, "you have approximately 5 seconds to release that woman before I have you arrested for assault on a decorated service member." The title "decorated service member" rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Phones swung back up to capture this moment, the story taking on dimensions that no one had expected when they'd started recording a routine checkpoint harassment. The explosion of recognition happened all at once. Chief Walsh's tablet erupted with notifications as authentication flooded through Pentagon confirmation, DoD alerts, and even CIA verification arriving with reluctant acknowledgement of Rachel's service record. "Lieutenant Rachel Adams," the Navy commander announced, his voice carrying clearly across the checkpoint. "Call sign Ghost, SEAL Team 4, Silver Star recipient, Classified Operations Specialist, Protected Identity Program." The crowd erupted with recognition, and stories began flowing like a dam had burst. An older man in a Marine Corps cap pushed forward, his voice thick with emotion. "She saved my grandson's whole unit in helmet," he called out. "Carried 2 wounded men through a kilometer of enemy fire." More voices joined the chorus. "She visited my brother at Walter Reed. She's the one who got those contractors out of Mosul. She helped me with my VA paperwork when no one else would." Master Sergeant Collins cut Rachel's zip ties with practiced precision, his movements reverent as he helped her to her feet. She stood slowly, each movement now recognized as tactical grace rather than simple motion. Without speaking, she began collecting her scattered belongings. The challenge coins were retrieved with reverence, the photograph cleaned of dust, and finally, the sealed trident badge. She held it up to the sun, studying it as if seeing it for the first time in years, then clipped it to her shirt where it belonged, visible, undeniable. The crowd fell silent as she finally spoke, her voice carrying despite its quiet tone. "Officer Hawkins, badge number 2847. Martinez, 3921. Thompson, 4102. Each number dropped with precision, landing like hammer blows in the suddenly quiet air. Checkpoint Camera 3 has recorded everything since 1432 hours, she continued, her tactical mind automatically converting to military time. The Veterans Legal Foundation will have my full report by tonight. Chief Walsh stammered apologies, but Rachel's attention had shifted to the elderly veteran who'd recognized her items. She studied his face, memory clicking into place. "Colonel Rivers?" she asked, her voice softening with recognition. "You remember me," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Marcus made it home because of you. You carried him 2 kilometers through enemy fire while wounded yourself." He turned to the crowd, his voice growing stronger. "This woman is why 13 families didn't get folded flags. Why my grandson is alive to see his children grow up." A young woman pushed forward through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "Tyler Washington was my brother. You didn't just visit him at Walter Reed. You paid for his prosthetics when the VA failed him." More stories emerged, painting a picture of quiet service that had continued long after her official discharge. Rachel had spent 3 years moving through the shadows, helping veterans navigate bureaucracy, providing financial assistance that appeared as administrative errors, being present at bedsides when young soldiers needed someone who understood. Hawkins tried to slink away, but Rachel's voice stopped him cold. "Officer Hawkins." He froze as she continued, her words measured and precise. "You asked if I think I'm better than you. I don't, but I fought for your right to be wrong. My brothers died for your freedom to dishonor your badge." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd. "Every veteran you've humiliated here, every abuse of power, it ends today. Not just for me, but for them." Federal agents arrived. Within the hour, their badges and suits a stark contrast to the desert checkpoint setting. They moved with the efficiency of people who'd been briefed on the situation during their drive, understanding that this had escalated far beyond a simple civil rights violation. Agent Patricia Coleman, FBI Civil Rights Division, took point on the investigation. She'd seen the preliminary reports, the video footage that was already going viral, and the military records that painted a picture of systematic abuse of power at Checkpoint 19. "Officers Hawkins, Martinez, and Thompson," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement. "You're under arrest for violation of civil rights under color of law, false imprisonment, and assault on a military service member." Hawkins's face went white as the handcuffs clicked into place. "You can't do this. I was just doing my job." "Your job," Agent Coleman replied coldly, "was to conduct immigration enforcement, not to abuse and humiliate American citizens, especially not a decorated war hero." Martinez dropped to his knees, babbling apologies that fell on deaf ears. His military background made him understand, perhaps better than the others, exactly how badly they'd miscalculated. Thompson simply walked away, dropping his badge on the ground like it was contaminated. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the 3 officers were led away in federal custody. Within hours, Checkpoint 19 would be shut down permanently, pending a complete investigation. The footage of Rachel's humiliation and subsequent revelation had already been viewed by millions, sparking a nationwide conversation about veteran treatment and police accountability. But the most powerful moment came when the young boy with the "My Daddy Serves" pen approached Rachel. His mother tried to hold him back, but Rachel knelt to his level, understanding that this moment mattered more than any federal investigation. "Is your daddy deployed?" she asked gently. The boy nodded solemnly. "He's in Afghanistan. Mommy says he's keeping us safe." "He's very brave," Rachel told him, her voice soft but firm. "And when he comes home, he deserves respect. Always remember that." She unpinned one of her challenge coins, a Special Forces coin that had traveled with her through 3 deployments, and placed it in his small hand. "Give this to him when he gets home. Tell him it's from someone who understands what it means to serve." The boy's face lit up with pride, and in that moment, Rachel realized why she couldn't stay hidden anymore. Not for glory or recognition, but so children like him never had to see their heroes dishonored. Admiral James Crawford, who'd flown in from Naval Special Warfare Command, approached with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. His presence alone made the remaining checkpoint personnel stand straighter, understanding they were in the presence of someone who could end careers with a word. "Lieutenant Adams," he said, his voice carrying the weight of official recognition. "On behalf of the Navy and the American people, I apologize for what you've endured here today." Rachel stood, her bearing automatically shifting to military attention despite her civilian clothes. "Thank you, sir, but no apology is necessary. I chose to serve, and that service doesn't end when the uniform comes off." The Admiral nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. "We'd like to offer you transport, protection, whatever you need. The media is already calling for interviews, and there will be congressional hearings about this incident. Rachel shook her head politely. I appreciate the offer, sir, but I just want to pass through like any other citizen. That's all I've ever wanted. She handed Colonel Rivers a card with just a phone number written on it. For any veteran who needs help. That's all I've ever wanted to keep serving them. As she prepared to leave, repacking her belongings with the same careful precision she'd shown throughout the ordeal, the crowd began to disperse, but they didn't leave quietly. They left with stories, with video footage, with a renewed understanding of what service meant and what respect looked like. The video footage exploded across social media platforms within hours of Rachel's release. #CheckpointJustice and #RespectOurVeterans trended worldwide, as millions watched the transformation of a routine harassment into a moment of national reckoning. News organizations picked up the story, but they found Rachel impossible to reach. She'd disappeared back into the anonymity she'd cultivated for 3 years, leaving behind only the impact of her brief emergence from the shadows. At the Pentagon, emergency meetings convened to address the broader implications of the incident. The protected identity program that had kept Rachel hidden was now compromised, but her handler, Agent Sarah Chun, reported that Lieutenant Adams had made peace with her exposure. She knew this day would come, Chun reported to the assembled officials. She's been preparing for it, using her time in civilian life to build networks that can help veterans when official channels fail. The investigation into Checkpoint 19 revealed a pattern of abuse that stretched back years. Hawkins had been systematically targeting veterans, immigrants, and anyone he perceived as vulnerable. His personnel file showed dozens of complaints that had been ignored or dismissed by supervisors who prioritized throughput over constitutional rights. Martinez's military records revealed a pattern of disciplinary actions that had led to his discharge. His hiring at Border Patrol had been a bureaucratic oversight, a failure of the system to properly vet those given law enforcement authority. Thompson's case was more complex. His military service had been honorable, but the stress of civilian law enforcement had gradually corrupted his sense of duty. Psychologists would later describe his situation as a cautionary tale about the need for better support systems for veterans transitioning to civilian careers. The 3 officers faced federal charges that would likely result in significant prison time. Their law enforcement careers were over, their pensions forfeited, their names permanently associated with the abuse of power. But the real change began at the policy level. Within a week of the incident, Homeland Security Secretary Maria Gonzalez announced a comprehensive review of all checkpoint operations. New protocols would be implemented, requiring additional training on veteran recognition and constitutional rights. The Veterans Legal Foundation, energized by the attention Rachel's case had brought to their cause, launched a nationwide campaign to provide legal representation for veterans who'd been similarly mistreated. Donations poured in from across the country, funding that would help countless other veterans seek justice. In Flagstaff, Rachel's library colleagues watched the news coverage with amazement. Their quiet coworker, the woman who'd helped them organize charity drives and volunteer events, was suddenly revealed as a decorated war hero. But when she returned to work the following Monday, she deflected all questions with characteristic humility. "I'm the same person I was last week," she told her concerned supervisor. "I just want to keep helping people." The elderly veteran, who lived 2 houses down from Rachel, finally knocked on her door that evening. Colonel Eugene Rivers, retired Marine Corps, stood on her porch with tears in his eyes. "I knew there was something special about you," he said, "but I never imagined my grandson owes you his life." Rachel invited him in for coffee, and they talked until late into the night. Stories of service, of sacrifice, of the bonds that connected all who'd worn the uniform. It was the first time in 3 years that Rachel had allowed herself to fully remember to honor the memories she'd been suppressing. The young boy whose father was deployed sent her a hand-drawn picture, delivered by his mother with a note of thanks. The drawing showed a woman in uniform with a cape, labeled Real Hero. It went on Rachel's refrigerator next to photos of her fallen teammates and the folded flag that honored their sacrifice. Media requests continued to pour in, but Rachel ignored them all. She had no interest in fame or publicity. Her mission remained the same as it had been for 3 years: quiet service to those who'd served. 6 months after the checkpoint incident, Rachel stood before a joint session of Congress, invited to testify about veteran services and the need for systemic reform. She wore a simple blue dress, her seal trident pin the only indication of her extraordinary background. "Members of Congress," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "I'm not here as a hero. I'm here as a voice for the voiceless, for the veterans who've been forgotten by the system they once served." Her testimony was brief but powerful, focusing not on her own experience but on the broader issues facing veterans. She spoke of bureaucratic failures, of the need for accountability, of the importance of treating all veterans with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. Every veteran who's been mistreated at a checkpoint, every homeless veteran sleeping under a bridge, every veteran struggling with mental health issues, they all deserve better than what we're currently providing. The congressional hearing led to the Veterans Dignity Act, bipartisan legislation that strengthened protections for veterans and created new oversight mechanisms for law enforcement interactions with military personnel. But Rachel's real work continued in the shadows. The attention from the checkpoint incident had brought her into contact with a network of advocates and organizations working to improve veteran services. She became a connector, a facilitator, someone who could navigate both official channels and unofficial networks to get help where it was needed. Her librarian Flagstaff transformed into an unofficial command center for veteran assistance. Social workers, lawyers, and advocates regularly consulted with her, understanding that her unique combination of military experience and civilian connections made her invaluable in complex cases. The Honda Civic was replaced with a more reliable vehicle, funded by anonymous donations from grateful veterans and their families. Rachel used it to travel across the Southwest, visiting veteran communities, identifying needs, and connecting resources with those who needed them. She never spoke publicly about her military service again, but her influence grew quietly. Young veterans found mentorship, older veterans found advocacy, and families found support during their darkest moments. The checkpoint where she'd been humiliated was eventually converted into a Veterans Resource Center, funded by a coalition of organizations inspired by her story. A plaque near the entrance read, "Dedicated to all who served and to those who continue to serve them." Officer Derek Hawkins was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Martinez received 3 years, while Thompson's cooperation with investigators earned him a reduced sentence of 18 months. All 3 were permanently barred from law enforcement, their careers ending in disgrace. But Rachel took no satisfaction from their punishment. Justice was important, but it was the positive changes that mattered, the policy reforms, the increased awareness, the renewed commitment to treating veterans with dignity. On quiet evenings at her home in Flagstaff, Rachel would sit on her porch with Colonel Rivers, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant colors. They'd share stories, plan community events, and sometimes just sit in comfortable silence. 2 old warriors finding peace in service. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were balanced now by dreams of possibility. Every veteran she helped, every family she supported, every young person she inspired to serve, they all represented hope for a better future. The Trident badge sat in a place of honor on her mantelpiece, alongside photos of her fallen teammates and letters from grateful veterans. It reminded her daily that some battles were fought with weapons, but the most important ones were fought with compassion, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to those who'd answered the call to serve. Rachel Adams had stopped running from her past. Instead, she'd embraced it, using her experience and her pain to build something better for those who would follow. The ghost had become real again, not as a weapon of war, but as a guardian of those who'd given everything for their country. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all, not the punishment of those who'd wronged her, but the transformation of her pain into purpose, her suffering into service, her silence into a voice for the voiceless. The road ahead stretched endlessly, filled with veterans who needed help, families who needed support, and a nation that needed to remember the true meaning of service. Rachel Adams would be there for all of it, one quiet mission at a time, one life at a time, one act of service at a time. Because that's what warriors do. They protect, they serve, and they never leave anyone behind. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.